WWF No Mercy, easily the most iconic and cherished wrestling game ever released. But what less people are aware of is that we nearly got an even more refined wrestling game that was intended to follow this classic up. No Mercy for the Nintendo 64 has rightfully body-checked its way to the top of the fan-favourite podium. However, the crown jewel of Aki Corporation's Nintendo 64 legacy was never intended to be the final curtain call, but rather the penultimate act before a grander encore. Yes, my friends, there was once a rumour of a game called WWF Backlash, an alleged follow-up destined for the Nintendo 64 that, if the whispers are true, could have eclipsed No Mercy itself. So today, join me as we step through the ropes of gaming's great what if and uncover the chaotic tale of what might have been. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the baffling, beguiling story of WWF Backlash. Yeah. These days we tend to get polygonal wrestling games every year, and if you are keen to try some of the modern iterations out, you can use my links to get a massive 60% off AEW Fight Forever, along with huge discounts on the WWE 2K games. In fact, if you want to try out something for crazy cheap, via my pinned comment you could even get WWE 2K Battlegrounds for under $2.50. But don't worry if you don't fancy a wrestling game at present, use my links to get up to 90% off thousands of other games too, including most newly released heavy hitters. Happy shopping and enjoy this video. To truly understand the curious tale of WWF Backlash, we must first set the stage, rewinding time back to the dawn of the new millennium to an era whereby both professional wrestling and video games stood on the edge of greatness. In the squared circle, the infamous Monday Night Wars are reaching their feverish crescendo. The World Wrestling Federation, spearheaded by the larger-than-life likes of Stone Cold, The Rock, and the sexual deviant but ever boisterous Mr. McMahon, have begun thoroughly decimating their Monday night rivals WCW. But the Federation weren't just winning on television, they were pinning their competition in the digital domain too. You see, by the year 2000, the WWF had managed to slam down not one, not two, but three vastly different and critically adored wrestling titles across all the era's dominant home consoles. On Sega's Dreamcast, there was the frenzied arcade chaos of WWF Royal Rumble, and over on Sony's grey beam of the PlayStation, WWF SmackDown 2 Know Your Role was delivering the goods with lightning-fast animations and a shockingly deep season mode, thanks to the folks at Ukes. But if you were lucky enough to be clutching a three-pronged Nintendo 64 controller in your sweaty palms, you had access to what many still consider the absolute zenith of wrestling game design, WWF No Mercy. Developed by the legendary tag team of Asmic Ace and Aki Corporation, this was no mere sports title, it was a pixelated wrestling religion. Unlike its flashier cousins, No Mercy was born from a deep lineage of mechanically rich games that traced their roots back to Japan's Virtual Pro Wrestling series. These games, many of which had been stealthily localized into WCW branded titles in the West, had been building momentum, culminating in the Attitude Era masterpiece that hit shelves in November of 2000. With intricate grappling mechanics, a positively stacked roster, and a control scheme smoother than a Stone Cold Stunner, WWF No Mercy wasn't just a highlight of the Nintendo 64 library, it was the culmination of an entire generation of wrestling game evolution. WWF No Mercy wasn't just a game, it was a digital distillation of the entire Attitude Era, bursting at the seams with match types, branching storylines, hidden characters, backstage brawls, and unlockables galore. It was the WrestleMania 17 of cartridge-based wrestling. No Mercy offered a level of freedom and precision that had scarcely been matched. Its intuitive grappling system, honed over years, was deceptively deep, offering gameplay so compelling that fans are still piling into the digital ring to this very day. It is, without question, one of the most enduring multiplayer experiences the Nintendo 64 ever birthed. So imagine the excitement when rumblings began to circulate, whispers in the pages of GamePro no less, that an even bigger, bolder sequel was on the way. Allegedly titled WWF Backlash, this phantom follow-up was said to be arriving before the end of 2001, delivering an upgraded experience with brand new match stipulations including the likes of TLC matches, Hell in a Cell encounters, and even 6-man tag bouts, something the Nintendo 64 had never dared before. Of course, these claims were never officially confirmed. and much of what we know, or think we know, is based on a foggy blend of hearsay, magazine tidbits, and tantalising fan speculation. But if Backlash was real, it would have made full use of Nintendo 64's memory expansion pack, allowing for more wrestlers on screen simultaneously and opening the door to match chaos that would make even Shane McMahon blush. Whether it was a true game in development or merely the victim of a wild rumour mill spinning out of control, one thing was certain. The idea of WWF No Mercy having a sequel on the same console was enough to drive wrestling fans crazy. But alas, dear viewers, as we rolled into the latter half of 2001, the world of professional wrestling, much like the technology used to simulate it, was undergoing a cataclysmic metamorphosis. The wrestling landscape had been turned on its head, suplexed into submission by none other than Vincent Kennedy McMahon himself. Both ECW and WCW, once proud empires in their own right, had been gobbled up and absorbed into the ever-expanding maw of the WWF, forming the basis for what would become one of the most infamously bungled storylines in wrestling history, the Invasion angle. With 3 rosters worth of talent suddenly available, the Federation now had access to the deepest bench of wrestlers the industry had ever seen. A veritable buffet of grappling legends, mid-card workhorses, and plucky underdogs all now awkwardly coexisting under one creative banner. To make things even weirder, the company's beloved beer-swigging anti-hero, Stone Cold Steve Austin, had turned heel, a creative swerve that bewildered children, angered adults, and confused just about everyone not on Vince's payroll. It was a strange, fascinating and deeply chaotic time, the kind of transitional era that would have made for a deliciously rich backdrop for a wrestling game. WWF Backlash, had it truly existed, could have immortalised this Frankensteinian roster of a Nintendo 64 in all its peculiar glory. According to whispers and retrospective commentary, the project was reportedly cancelled after reaching just 30% completion, a number often repeated yet never officially confirmed. What is known, however, is that Aki Corporation and Asmic Ace were allegedly informed by THQ that the Nintendo 64's days were numbered. With a shiny new GameCube on the horizon, the directive was clear: abandon the aged Nintendo 64 battleground and start building for the new gen war. And so, Backlash was shelved, the ropes were packed away, the Titantron dimmed, and not long after, THQ would end their fruitful partnership with Aki altogether. A split that sent shockwaves through the wrestling game community. In Aki's place, THQ handed the creative reins to Yuke's, the very same studio responsible for the SmackDown series on Sony's hardware. Yuke's would go on to deliver WrestleMania 18 for the GameCube, marking a brand new era for digital WWF mayhem. Sadly, the golden age was over, the grapple gods had left the building, and with Backlash cancelled, THQ and Aki parting ways like two jilted tag partners after a pay-per-view betrayal, one might assume that Asmic Ace and their allies would vanish into the digital ether, never to grace the squared circle again. But nay, dear viewers, this story has one final swerve in store. As the wrestling world imploded under McMahon's monopolistic weight, Asmic found themselves courted by an unlikely suitor, Electronic Arts. You see, EA had plans of their own. Before WCW was gobbled up by Vince's latest corporate buffet, the publishing giant had struck a deal with Asmic to develop WCW Mayhem 2, a sequel to their previous WCW effort, this time destined for a more powerful PlayStation 2. This wasn't just a speculative whisper either. GamePro magazine previewed it, and outlets like Unseen64 would later unearth fascinating tidbits, including a branching storyline campaign, an arsenal of over 1,000 wrestling maneuvers, and match types including the crimson-drenched First Blood and the endurance testing gauntlet mode. But much like Backlash, WCW Mayhem 2 would meet its doom before it could land a single dropkick. In March 2001, Vince McMahon's acquisition of WCW rendered the entire license null and void, making EA's budding project as obsolete as Glacier's bush. So what was a talented development house to do, left with a powerful wrestling engine and no wrestling company to wrap it around? In one of the greatest pivots in video game history, Asmic and Aki would team up once more, this time unleashing their creation upon the world not as a wrestling simulator, but as Def Jam Vendetta. Yes, you heard that correctly. The same engine that once simulated Chris Jericho and Kurt Angle locking horns would now bring to life the lyrical beatdowns of DMX, Ludacris, Method Man and more. Def Jam Vendetta was absurd on paper. Technically a wrestling game starring rappers dripping in street attitudes, licensed bling and testosterone, and yet against all odds, it worked. It worked brilliantly. But grappling mechanics, so finely tuned over the years of wrestling game refinement, lent themselves shockingly well to hip-hop fisticuffs. It was a game that, on the surface, looked like it should have been laughed out of the ring, but instead, it became a cult classic. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, the spiritual successor to WWF No Mercy does exist. It just traded steel chairs for spinning rims and turnbuckles for turntables. In many ways, Def Jam Vendetta is WWF Backlash, just with the volume turned up, the belt swapped for bling and the roster replaced by chart-topping rappers. The bones are there, the engine is intact, and the moves hit just as hard. But let's be honest with ourselves, shall we? As delightfully ridiculous as it was to see Method Man suplex Ghostface Killer in a neon-lit back alley, it wasn't quite the Nintendo 64 sequel wrestling fans have been dreaming of. No, what the people wanted, what the faithful, the diehards, the cartridge-clutching disciples of Aki craved, was a true follow-up to No Mercy on its native platform, even if it launched into a rapidly aging console cycle. Even if it sold only a modest number of copies, even if it were little more than No Mercy Plus, with new match types, new arenas and that unhinged 2001 roster. There's no doubt the world would have loved it. Officially, the dream died, but unofficially, it lived on. While No Mercy may have been the final wrestling game to emerge from the Aki-Yasmic partnership on the 64-bit battlefield, that wasn't the end of a story. In fact, it was only the beginning of something rather beautiful. You see, where corporate hands faltered, the fans stood tall. Enter the modding community, a ragtag brotherhood of grappling game obsessives who took no mercy and refused to let it fade quietly into retro obscurity. With unrelenting passion, and what I can only assume to be a dangerous amount of free time, these digital artisans began transforming No Mercy into something more than a game. They transformed it into a platform, a chameleon capable of becoming any promotion, any era, any roster. So while WWF Backlash never got to raise its hand in victory, the spirit of a sequel found new life in fan creations. And unlike the developers bound by licensing and budget constraints, who needs those, the community answered to no one but themselves, building match types, arenas and storylines that the official developers never could. They did what Nintendo don't, or perhaps what Nintendo don't let them do. While the PlayStation and Nintendo 64 era was blessed with a veritable steel cage full of WWF and WCW titles, some good, some great, and some best left on a dusty shelf, one promotion sadly never got the digital justice in the form of an Aki-Yasmic great. The blood-soaked, chair-swinging madhouse known as Extreme Championship Wrestling. Despite the promotion's cultural significance and rabid fanbase, ECW was lumbered with a pair of official video games that were, to put it politely, more botched than brilliant. But fret not, lovers of the land of tables and Terry Funk, for the No Mercy modding community has given ECW the hardcore homage it never officially received. Enter ECW Barely Legal, a fan-made masterpiece that breathes new life into the infamous Philadelphia promotion. Built on the rock-solid foundation of No Mercy, this mod lets you step into the bloodstained boots of your favourite extreme icons, from Sabu to Sandman, within authentically grimy arenas that smell of beer, blood and bankruptcy. This, dear viewers, is extreme. But perhaps you're more of a WCW loyalist. Someone who still mourns the glory days of Monday Nitro, NWO Invasions and Scott Steiner shouting mathematics. Well, the modding scene has you covered too. WCW Feel the Bang is a labour of love that elevates WCW's Nintendo 64 offerings to heights the official releases could only dream of. With refined mechanics and expanded roster and presentation worthy of the Monday Night Wars, it's the digital love letter the Turner Empire always deserved, but never got while alive. And if the chaos of the late 90s wrestling isn't your flavour, you can always time travel back to the golden age of babyfaces and body slams with WWF Legends and more. This lovingly crafted mod rewinds the clock to the rock and wrestling era. Combine the timeless visuals and mechanics of No Mercy with arenas draped in neon, an entrance theme straight out of a VHS tape, and you've got the perfect blend of two golden eras, the peak of pro wrestling and the peak of wrestling games. If you call yourself a wrestling fan, these mods aren't just optional curiosities, they're essential digital pilgrimages. Of course, dear viewers, the modding scene isn't solely concerned with honouring the past though. As the old saying goes, you can't powerbomb someone through a flaming table if you're always living in 1998, or something like that anyway. For those who prefer more modern wrestling thrills to vintage nostalgia, fear not, the No Mercy community has got you covered there too. Take NXT TakeOver for instance, a full-blown conversion that reimagines WWE's third-tier brand within the confines of a Nintendo 64 cartridge. With sharp presentation, custom models, and No Mercy's famously flexible moveset, the modders have given us a glimpse into what NXT could have looked like had Triple H booked talent on a CRT in the early 2000s. But the innovation doesn't stop there. The Mexican wrestling phenomenon, Luchador Underground, with its blend of high-flying lucha libre and supernatural soap opera, has also been lovingly brought to life in ROM form. And if you're a fan of the indie scene, Indie Forever is your golden ticket. A sprawling tribute that lets players throw hands at the stars from TNA, Ring of Honor, and beyond. And then there's Showdown 64, the proverbial WrestleMania of No Mercy mods. A titanic mashup that transcends time, space, and kayfabe itself, offering a roster that blends every promotion, every era, and just about every wrestler you can imagine into one glorious digital melting pot. From Andre the Giant to Kenny Omega, Showdown 64 is the multiverse of wrestling mayhem, and you're invited to the main event. WWF No Mercy is no ordinary game. It's a cultural artifact, a relic of the golden age of wrestling, and a masterclass in gameplay design. It continues to inspire, entertain, and unite wrestling fans and gamers alike across generations. So it comes as no surprise that the legend of WWF Backlash, be it real, imagined, or somewhere in between, still captures the collective imagination. It's a tantalising what-if from an era where anything seemed possible, but more importantly, it's a window into a legacy of a game that simply refuses to stay down for the count. Don't forget you can use my links to get a massive 60% of AEW Fight Forever, along with huge discounts on the WWE 2K games too. In fact, if you want to try out something for crazy cheap via my pinned comments, you can even get WWE 2K Battlegrounds for under $2.50. But don't worry if you don't fancy a wrestling game at present, use my links to get up to 90% off thousands of other games too, including most newly released heavy hitters. Happy shopping and cheerio.
Diggity dog. Breaking.